Welcome in to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. A podcast dedicated to everything you need to know about the squad. Hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and those who cover the NBA on a daily basis. It's time to flock up. The New Orleans Pelicans Podcast starts right now.
I mean, Z's doing it all. He is drawing so much attention, and then he just stole the inbounds on cue. Right hand throwdown. Thank you, Zion.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Friday edition of your New Orleans Pelicans podcast, the official podcast of the New Orleans Pelicans. It is TGIF. It is Friday. I'm happy. A smiling Jim Eichenhofer is sitting here across from me here as well, smiling for so many reasons. What a waste, the first week. I'm gonna throw in New Year's Eve as the first week of January. You got you win against your Lakers. The Pels continue to win 5 straight now on the road, 4 straight overall. And my goodness, man, John DeShazier is going to join us next segment. And I can talk to him about 3 hours on that win. I think I'm going to open up by actually saying I could talk 3 hours about that win. Am I the only one that is that excited? I thought that win against the T-Wolves said a lot, Jim.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of a statement victory. I feel like the Pelicans still, to some extent, are flying under the radar a little bit. I mean, they've won 4 in a row. It's not like they've won 15 in a row and that kind of thing where you're garnering automatic national attention. But, I mean, to be able to go into Minnesota the way that they did, only the second team to beat the Timberwolves in Target Center, first team to do it in a while. It was impressive, and I mean, it was not just that they won, but the fact that they pretty much dominated the game and ended up winning by double figures, and I think the final score was maybe even a little bit misleading. It was really kind of a 20-point win more than a 10 or 12-point win.
Yeah, I think there's so many things that I can take out of there, too. I might have texted you. I was texting everybody, so I lost count in that game against Minnesota, but I thought Zion looked the best he'd look. I thought B.I. once again is playing remarkable. The 3 starters, the assists again. I think it's another game where everybody had 5 or more assists. There's so much to get into. What specifically really stood out to you from some of those players?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that, it was almost the third time in the last 4 games that the quote-unquote big 3 all had 20 points. Ingram had 19, so he was 1 point away from between C.J. McCollum and Zion Williamson all having 20, so that was impressive. I mean, during this 4-game winning streak, those 3 guys are averaged almost exactly the same number of points, which is kind of an interesting stat that B.I.'s averaging 20.8. C.J. and Zion are both averaging exactly 21 a game. Pelicans have a total of 7 players that are averaging 8.5 points or more during the 4 wins. So, I mean, it's been a bunch of different players contributing. And also, once again, I love what the bench has been doing. I mean, Jose's been outstanding. He had 8 points in the first half of the game against Minnesota. Bringing the defense once again. Larry Nance in the second half had 8 points. And just, I mean, his return to the lineup has coincided with the 4 games in a row that they've won. So it's interesting. The reaction to when he came back was surprisingly negative or tepid. But he's shown that when he's right physically, the guy makes a huge difference. And that's been very evident over the last week plus.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about, too, especially when you're seeing what the team is sort of doing, look, Jose's kind of mentioned it, Willie's sort of mentioned it, and you and I have been talking about it, we're ahead of the game, about this team trying to take the step. I love that they're talking about it. I love that Jose and Willie have said, hey, look, we're starting to get there. We're starting to get the step. And that's, to be a contender, you have to be consistent on winning. There's a couple of other things to check, on that checklist as well. But I think that's one of the things that I like that I'm hearing this team do, right? And one of it is taking every game serious, going out, taking care of your business. We mentioned they didn't play with their food when it came to the Nets. That's not being disrespectful. That's, you look at the schedule, you got to get into it. Because the thing that I'm going to get with JD here as well, you look at the month of January, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. I'm trying to paint a perspective picture for fans. 15 games in the month. And I think I even asked you this as well. Give me your top 5 to 7 players in the NBA. Who's your top 5 to 7 players in the NBA right now? Just off the top of your head.
I mean, you'd have to go Jokic, making half-court shots.
Sure.
Embiid. After that, I'd have to think about it in terms of how guys are playing right now. I mean, I think Kawhi, when he's at his best is probably somewhere on the fringe of the top 5.
Okay, the reason is I'm showing you the month schedule on my phone is
Giannis.
Did you see the month?
I saw a Bucks logo on there.
Exactly.
So I
well,
thought
that's what I'm
Giannis,
saying.
yeah.
Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is somebody that Todd Graffanini brought up as well. That's on the back-to-back, OKC and Milwaukee. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Boston at the end of the month. Luka Doncic, all he does is score 50. It's pretty good. Top 5?
Yeah,
top
he's
7 player?
halfway decent player,
Okay,
yeah.
You're going to see them
phenomenal.
twice next week. We hadn't even got to, some guy named Steph Curry.
Right.
In Golden State.
Right.
That's on Wednesday. De'Aaron Fox is not a bad player. I don't know if he's top 5 just yet,
Yeah.
but he's definitely top 10. John DeShazier said at times he can play there. You mentioned Jokic. You just mentioned the guys on the Clippers. Look, there's 3 Hall of Famers, arguably, are there. And Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, who is healthy, along with James Harden, who's a Hall of Famer. So
Don't forget Westbrook, too, who won MVP.
That's
who's
what
also,
I'm getting at. Yeah. And we just finished with Anthony Edwards, who's another player that Todd Graffanini thinks is an MVP candidate this year because they're number 1 seed. That's the month of January.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. So I'm painting that perspective, or that picture of perspective, because of this. I think if you can get through the month of January with 1 more win than a loss, you pat yourself on the back. It's a grind month. You get through it. And I think if you can do that, it really puts you in a position, I think, where you absolutely will be 6 or above, and you're within earshot with 2.5 months to go for that 4 seed. And that's what I'm getting at, where if you don't want to be trying to, battle your way back up. But, man, you go 8-7, I'm feeling really good about this team. Todd wants 9 or 10. But I'm just, again, that's why I bring it up. You're literally going to be playing easily top 10 NBA players on teams that are on the top of their conferences and are playing good basketball. You come out with more wins than losses at the end of this month, I'm going to pat you on the back.
Sure. Yeah, I think part of where Graf is coming from, not to put words in his mouth in terms of his optimism, is it seems like the way that they're playing lately, you're shooting higher than 1 game over 500. But your point is well taken in terms of the opposition that they have coming up and the schedule that they have coming up as well. And if I can throw in a slightly hot take too here, in terms of the month of January, I think you could make a case that the next 6 games, which is the Clippers tonight here, and then the 5-game road trip, could be the most important stretch of the rest of the season. And the reason I say that is because it's the only stretch that they have left. I kind of glanced through the schedule and figured this out. It's the only stretch of the schedule they have left where 5 of the next 6 games of those that I mentioned are against top 7 teams in the West. Pelicans are 6 right now. Clippers are 4th. That's who they play tonight. At Sacramento, 5th on Sunday. Golden State's 11th. That's the one kind of outlier, but it's like the Warriors are the outlier in this. Gee, thanks. That's the quote unquote weak team that you get to play.
And that's at Oakland. I mean,
in
San Francisco, by the way. Yeah.
And then Friday, Denver's 3rd right now in the West, and then you play 2 games in a row against Dallas, and they're in 7th. So I mean, you could make a case. Another factor too. That game against Denver is the last meeting of the season between the Pelicans and the Nuggets. Season series will be at stake because it's 1-1. And then the 2 games in Dallas are the last 2 times you play the Mavericks this year as well. That series is also 1-1. So, I mean, I don't want to go overboard here, but I do think that this part of January, I mean, the whole month is important because of some of the teams that you play, but specifically this next stretch of the next couple of weeks between today and Martin Luther King Day, we could look back in April and say, some of these games determine a lot as far as seeding and positioning in the West. Yeah, no doubt. Like I said, I think it makes it exciting because you want to see that step. So my goal, Jim, at the end of this month, aside from probably, continuing my New Year's resolution, which sometimes I don't even make it 2 days in, Did you make it to January 5th at least? I never made it to January 5th. Oh, no, I was not going to have wine at night. I was not going to do that. It's gone. It's over. Yeah. So it's done. We'll wait Come for back. 20. Yeah, there's still next year. Exactly. You can do it next year. But that's kind of what I want to see. I would love to be sitting here and doing that podcast after the Rockets game at the end of the month and saying, Jim, I think I'm ready to say the New Orleans Pelicans are contenders. I would love to say that, but because we're going to get a lot of taste. Because one thing that's interesting too, they're going to be facing a lot of teams that close well late. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is one of the best closers on here, so we're going to see if some of those lessons have been learned in clutch moments.
look, I'd love to say everyone's going to stay healthy. Somebody's going to, like, no one saw Trey Murphy missing a couple games, right? So you're going to go through that this month at some point. So I'm curious. They might lose 2 games in a row. How do you bounce back? We saw them do that at the end of December. 2 tough losses, with Memphis and Houston, and they finished that homestand strong. So I think this is going to be it's going to be a month of learning and growth, I think, for this team. And I think I have faith, but I think if they do what I think they're capable of doing, we may, for the first time, legitimately look at this team as a contender. We haven't yet. We haven't.
Yeah.
Look, we haven't even got to the postseason yet. Zion Williamson hasn't played a playoff game ever, much less with this unit. So there's a lot they got to get to. But, hey, no one's telling OKC right now that they can't compete, right? So all those different aspects of it. But that's why I think this month, this stretch that you're talking about, it's going to be key.
Yeah, I mean, I think if they can stay, I mean, they're 6th place right now. If they can stay in the top 6, or even if they can get further above 500, maybe they'll be in the top 4 of the West too, which would be great. So many good signs. You mentioned Trey Murphy's been out the last 3 games, and yet they still won all 3 of those games. So continuing to do a better and better job of being able to win despite not having guys in the lineup, which was not as much the case when they started the season 4-6 through the first 10 games.
Yep, no doubt. Well, Jim, as always, appreciate the time, sir. We'll talk to you again next week. And again, it's going to be one heck of a road swing for sure.
I'm really looking forward to this road trip as far as just we said that the win against Minnesota was a statement win. I think they have the chance multiple times to do that going forward on this trip.
Give Jim a follow over on X. I keep saying it's Twitter X. Do you use Twitter or X the most?
I've been saying Twitter, but I'm starting to shift.
I am
more
too.
towards
It's starting to
X.
sound more normal.
Yeah.
Like at first I'm like, that's just weird. But anyway, it is. It's Jim_Eichenhofer. Best place, though, of course, is Pelicans.com. Jim puts all kinds of stuff up there as well. So thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good weekend. We'll see you next week. Coming up now, it's time to talk to the man, the myth, the legend himself, Mr. John DeShazier. All right, we'll welcome in our guest for today, color analyst, Mr. John DeShazier of your New Orleans Pelicans Radio Network. Sir, always nice to see you. How are you?
Always great, especially when the Pels are riding a 4-game winning streak. So.
My goodness. I legitimately could have done all 3 hours of my talk show on that win. I can do a 3-hour podcast on that win. Am I making too big a deal on the Pelicans win at Minnesota?
No, it was a back-to-back, and not just a back-to-back. A home road back-to-back against the top team in the conference. So these are the measuring stick games, if you will. People want to see what these Pelicans are made out of. Well, the Pelicans beat Dallas. They've beaten now Minnesota a couple of times. They've beaten the top teams in this conference, Sacramento. They've beaten the best teams in this conference. So if you want to have a measure of what the Pelicans are, we know, well, I don't necessarily know that we know what they are, but we certainly have an indication of what they can be, because when they're fully loaded, when they got everybody available, and when they're playing at their height, look, they're giving up, they're playing defense like a team that comes from 15 years ago, not a team in today's NBA, because today's NBA teams outscore one another, and the Pelicans are winning by defending.
So it's interesting. The last thing you just said there was defending. And obviously when you look at where the Pels are and what they were doing, especially in that win against Minnesota, you see the 3 starters above 20. We can talk about Zion. We're going to talk about BI. But I'm going to go back to something Jose Alvarado said after one of the wins here recently, in which he said, he said he talked to Willie Green. And he said, you know what, I'm going to play the bite.
We either going to outscore teams or we're going to stop teams. And I think I asked Coach this, actually, and he was like, I was like, what do you think, what type of team? He said, we got to be both to be really good. And I think that's what we're doing. We being good on both sides, and we winning games now.
So you hear there, John, he's talking about how he talked to Coach and said, hey, if you want to be one of the better teams, you're going to have to outscore teams. You're going to have to defend teams. When you look around the NBA, Boston when Ime Udoka was there, you look at Golden State in their run, they defended as well as scored. The teams that win championship games, JD, they do both, don't they?
Yeah, you got to be versatile. I mean, because there's going to be nights where you have to outscore teams. You might have to win 135 to 128. And there's going to be times where it's going to get into a slugfest, and you might have to win 108 to 105 or something like that. You have to be a versatile team in order to win both ways. That's what good teams do. If you can only score, then everybody's going to know who you are, number one. And number two, there are going to be games where you just get outscored because you don't defend anybody. If you only defend, it's going to be hard to score. So when you give up 115, it's going to be hard to win that game. But if you can play both styles, you can adapt to either style in any kind of game. So that's what the Pelicans look like they are right now.
All right, so let's talk about some particulars that I saw in that game that really stood out to me. And I think one thing that really stood out, I think I even texted you during the game. Zion Williamson looked like Zion Williamson from a year ago. He looked bouncy, he looked twitchy, he was fast, he was on the defensive end, he had blocks, he did a lot of different things that really stood out to me. Do you think that was his best game of the season, physically?
Yeah, I think just his, I don't know if I don't want to get all existential here, but his aura seemed to be different in the game. It just seemed like, not that he necessarily was more engaged, but he just seemed to be playing with a certain amount of joy, I guess, and verve and vibrancy that it's been present this year. But I mean, he looked like a dude he looked like he wanted to play 4 more games that night. I mean, he looked fresh and he looks engaged. And when you've got a guy like that who's that way leading the team, because everybody's going to take his lead. Now you take a lead from different guys on different nights. But when your number 1 overall pick, your franchise player, is playing that way, everybody has to stand up and take notice that, you know what? Oh, Z rotated over and blocked a shot. Mm-hmm. Oh, Z rotated over for a steal. Oh, Z's getting in people's way. He's defending. He's moving his feet. He's staying in front of people. Yeah. That's contagious.
I think the other thing that's contagious, too, that you're seeing with the fact that the starters are playing the way they did the night before in the win against the Nets, which is a complete wire-to-wire win as well. You look at that game, none of the starters had 20 or more points. In the T-Wolves game, all of the starters had 20 or more points, but you keep seeing those assist totals going on. Is it just literally that it's clicking for them, or they're starting to trust, they're starting to buy in? Is it all the above? But it's beautiful basketball to watch.
Well, I think they are trusting one another a little bit more. We're seeing less and less of the one-on-one situations, and even when they take a guy one-on-one, they're looking for the open teammate. Mm-hmm. That's what makes an offense go when you're sharing the basketball, because bodies don't move faster than the ball does. I mean, the ball travels through the air faster than guys can rotate. So there's going to be open shots. Now, of course, the responsibility lies with the shooter to make the shot, but the fact that these guys are making the shots and they're continuing to trust their teammates by passing the basketball out of double teams or getting themselves in trouble or drawing double teams and kicking it to the open guy in the corner or on the wing. Those are great signs, because we've seen this offense bog down. And when it bogs down, it's usually either Brandon Ingram or Zion Williamson taking people one-on-one and going into a fence and trying to score one-on-one. Well, you don't have to do that when you've got teammates who are putting the ball in the bucket. And not only that, when you got teammates putting it in the bucket, people are a little bit less inclined to double team you.
True.
Because they don't want to give up those open threes. So now all of a sudden you get defenses playing honest, and if you've got an honest defense playing against Zion Williamson, advantage is Z every single time.
I love the snapshots that I'm seeing from everyone that covers the Pels, whether it's reporters, podcasters, you name it, where you see 5-on-1, 3-on-1. You hear it in Todd's call, Zion, 3 people guarding him. And so it's interesting because you look statistically, sometimes stats tell you the story, John, and sometimes they don't. And I know that's part of your job. When you cover the Saints and the Pelicans, you try to look for the story inside the stats. It's crazy. Z a year ago, Z now. Statistically, last year, Z, more points, more rebounds, more assists, all those different aspects of it. But the team, I think, is better, even though last year at this time, team had more wins. It's strange how the stats maybe don't tell the whole story. Huh?
It just feels different. It just feels like everybody has bought in, if you want to call it that, or whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. But it seems like they're a lot more on one accord. They're a lot more cohesive right now, even though they did start better last year, as you said, even though Z had better stats, as you said, last year. But it seemed like he was just working a lot harder to get what he was getting, even though he was getting it. Whereas now, Z can take off. He can take off literally a quarter and have Brandon Ingram score 12 or 15 in that quarter, or C.J. McCollum score 4 threes in that quarter, or Jonas Valanciunas get you 8 points and 7 rebounds in that quarter. I mean, he doesn't have to stress himself as much, and that makes for a better, more well-rounded team. And oh, by the way, now Herb Jones has snapped out of his slump and giving you something offensively. So you got a lot of things working, and I hate to slight anybody because Larry Nance and Jose Alvarado off the bench have been phenomenal the last 4 games. Mm-hmm. Both of those guys individually have been responsible for a couple of wins, I think. I think Larry pretty much beat Utah, and I think Jose pretty much beat the Lakers. I know they beat the Lakers by 20, but Jose fueled that win by far. So I think they're getting great contributions from those guys off the bench. It's a great problem to have when you're trying to figure out where is Jordan Hawkins going to play.
Yeah.
Or, when Trey Murphy gets back, how are you going to get his minutes back to where they were? Or this, that, and the third with Naji Marshall in the rotation. Those are great problems to have and to figure out. But right now we see this team as a team that kind of has its parts fitted, and they fit pretty well.
Yeah.
And they're in a nice groove.
I think one of the other things that stands out, why I'm spending a little time on Z here as well, 29. Do you know what that number means?
I do not.
29 games is what he played last year. And he just hit 29 games against Minnesota. So tonight against the Clippers, he will pass that. Look, obviously we all want more than that and all this things, but it's little things like that that change the narrative, right, JD? Yeah. For him to change the narrative around a lot of the things around it, for this franchise to change it, he has to do it. This team has to play the postseason. He hasn't played a postseason game. He has to play. He has to finish a season. He has to go into all that. And I don't know if it's even going to be mentioned nationally. It might on NBA Today on ESPN, but it is a big thing because I think he's going to get healthier as the season goes on by the fact that I think, Wednesday you saw a little twitchier, a little faster Zion. And
in a back-to-back.
And look, Coach K said it, right? Hey, Michael Jordan said, when I get back to wanting to play, I play basketball. So, man, what if, JD, end of February, March, health still is there for him? He's going to, maybe if he gets closer to what he was last year physically, watch out, because I think he's going to get better, I guess is what I'm getting at here as the season goes on.
Basketball players need to play, and I'm going to knock wood all over the place that I can find it. Right. But I know a lot of angst and consternation was at hand when he didn't play a couple of early back-to-backs, and people were saying, oh, he's got to play, and the Pelicans were saying, look, this is the plan.
It's a good point.
This is the plan. We're going to, there are going to be some games where he's going to sit, but we're trying to make sure that this thing is a long-term thing. And so for him to be on the court, 29 games in, 30 going into tonight, and looking as springy as he does and looking like he's trending upward is a great sign, because it does suggest that the plan is working, and you want to make sure that it works throughout the season. I mean, there's no guarantees, obviously. But for right now, you have to at least look at it and say, well, you know what? They had a good thought there, and it looks like it was the right one, because you don't want to have him playing a back-to-back early and tweak something and have to sit out 5 games, or pull something and have to sit out a week and a half or 2 weeks, or twist something or sprain something and be out longer than that. They've managed it very, very well so far, and hopefully that management plan, you can throw it out of the window, because, again, as we just mentioned, man, a home road back-to-back, I don't know if people understand how difficult that is, because you don't have the comforts of home where you just play home and home back-to-back, where you go home to your own bed, all those things, you sleep in late. You got to get on a plane. You got to go to another city. It's freaking 19 degrees there. You got to get up. You got to get your body warmed up. You got to get your proper stretching in. You got to get your nutrition. You got to get ready for the game. And then you got to go out and play against Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns.
Right.
So for him to do what he did on Wednesday, after them taking care of business on Tuesday, because I think did he score 10 Tuesday? I think he scored 10 Tuesday. I can't remember exactly. But whatever it was, they managed Tuesday perfectly. They got a lesser team. They got them in here. They pounded them. They got the starters off the court. They got them off their feet. And they went on to Minnesota and handled business the next night as if they had not played the previous night.
Right.
Which is something Minnesota had lost one home game.
Yeah.
Had lost one
That's
home game.
probably one of the reasons. It's a tough place to go there.
Minnesota was running folks out of there. And the Pelicans go up there and, in a sense,
they control the game.
Yeah, they control the game. When you win by double figures on the road, you kind of ran that team out of there, because it's hard to win on the road as it is.
Yeah.
It's definitely hard to win by double figures, and it's definitely hard to win by double figures against the best team in the conference record-wise.
That was one of the things that really stood out to me in that win. Again, I could do 3 hours on that, too. It wasn't one of those, hey, Anthony Edwards was off that night. Oh, hey, Rudy Gobert was off that night. Oh, hey, Karl Anthony Towns didn't play well, got in foul trouble in the first quarter. The Pels did all those things to kind of secure that win. That's what really stood out to me. But I hadn't even got to this, and we got to get to the Clippers. But I got to ask you, because I don't think the Pels are where they are right now, and a big difference from last year to this year is I think Brandon Ingram's playing the best basketball of his career.
I think so too. I mean, and the willingness of he and Zion and C.J. McCollum, the Pels' big three, quote unquote, to share the basketball, but to score when called upon to do so, when they get the mismatches, and to kind of carry the offense for stretches, and for this team to recognize, hey, that guy's hot. That guy's hot. Let's get it to him. But Brandon Ingram, as you mentioned, playing by far his best defense.
That was the key.
By far his best defense. And being efficient offensively because he's not forcing anything. I know earlier in the season they wanted him to take more threes. It seemed like it was in his head mentally, hey, I'm a guy who takes 2 or 3 threes a game, but they want me to take 6 or 8, so I'm going to take these 6 or 8. And it looked like he was forcing it. Now he seems to be back more comfortable in his role, in his zone. And so for him to be playing the way he is and for him to accept, okay, I might not have it going tonight offensively. I might be 3 for 10 right now. But you know what? I can get 8 assists. I can block a shot. I can get 8 rebounds. Those are things that make everybody turn around and look and say, okay, if he's willing to sacrifice to win, why can't I sacrifice to win?
That phrase, put some respect on my name, he has respect to his name. So even when he's not, defenders are still going to honor it, right?
Oh, yeah.
And that's the fact. You hear the phrase gravity a lot with Z, but it's the same thing with all 3 of those guys. Hey, he might have had a bad night, but we've seen him hit a big shot in the fourth quarter. CJ, he might go through his stretches where he's hot in the first quarter, cold second, third, hits a big shot in the fourth. Those 3 guys have gravity, so you have to respect it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Those guys, no matter how they're playing in the game, if you're a defender, okay, it's clutch time, and this guy can get them a basket.
Yeah,
I gotta honor him. I gotta defend him. I can't just stray away from him and pretend he's not on the court. I got to guard him. And so you suck away something else because if that guy's got to guard CJ on the perimeter, that means that guy can't help on Zion. He can't help on Brandon Ingram. And if that guy's got to guard Brandon Ingram and somebody's going to rotate over to double, that means he's leaving somebody wide open, whether that be Brandon Ingram or whether that be Zion Williamson. But you're leaving somebody open, and now these guys have, those 3 seem to have figured it out. Hey, in the clutch moments, and we'll sprinkle Jonas Valanciunas in there for a little bit because they find him and he'll score too. But those guys have kind of played off one another very well in these stretches where, when there's a clutch basket or when there's a big basket to be made, one of those guys is producing it.
Sir, you are wearing black and gold, and you covered the Saints for many, many years. And inside that locker room, Drew Brees is a player that constantly said, hey, when you're good, the next game is the biggest game. And they get bigger and bigger the better you play. Well, guess what? Tonight is a big game because it's the Clippers. And when you take a look at the Clippers, 116-106, the earlier season meeting, the beard had just showed up. This is a completely different looking Clipper team than when these 2 teams faced earlier in the season, right? Am I wrong on that? His team is
totally different because they were discombobulated
so well
when he first got there, and people were laughing, and it was kind of funny because James Harden forced his way out of Philly, and he said, I want to go to the Clippers, and I don't know necessarily that Philly got the haul it wanted to, but more than anything, I think Philly looked at it as subtraction, addition by subtraction. They got a guy out who didn't want to be there anymore, and who was pretty much kind of speaking very ill of the organization. James Harden goes to the Clippers. They don't win early. Everybody's kind of laughing a little bit. But James Harden's a Hall of Fame player. And I think what can't be overlooked is Russell Westbrook saying, I'll go to the bench to make this thing work. I'll do that. So Russell Westbrook goes to the bench. James Harden is starting alongside Terrence Mann. And now suddenly you get the movement and distribution that you're looking for because James Harden ain't going to be a ball hog with the Clippers. You got Kawhi Leonard and you got Paul George. Those 2 mouths will be fed. Contractually it says so, and ability it says so. Those 2 guys don't need James Harden to get what they get, but having James Harden there probably makes it a little bit easier for them because now they can operate maybe with a little bit more space.
Well, they're healthy. They're healthy. Kawhi Leonard's averaging 24 points a game. Paul George is averaging 23 points a game. James Harden's averaging 17 points a game. But again, those 2 guys are healthy. A lot of times when the Pels have played the Clippers, they haven't been. So I'm curious because, again, matchups, you say this all the time. Make or miss league and then also matchups. That's the NBA in a nutshell. I'm curious how they match up against this team where they're playing. You could argue, other than OKC, these are the 2 hottest teams meeting tonight. In the last 10 to 15 games are the Pelicans and the Clippers.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think they're playing as well as any 2 teams in the league. I want to see what the Pels do.
They'll play off
offensively.
field tonight.
Yeah, I want to see what the Pels do out defensively because Herb is going to take one of those two. I'm going to assume it'll be Paul George because Kawhi Leonard is pretty strong. He's pretty cut. And so maybe that's going to be Brandon Ingram's responsibility. I don't know, but I'm anxious to see how the Pelicans match up with them defensively. Or maybe Herb Jones does start on Kawhi Leonard, and maybe you start, C.J. McCollum on Paul George, and you see if you can steal some minutes that way. You figure Dyson Daniels is going to play a decent amount in this game because somebody's going to have to go out there to try to stop those guys. Dyson Daniels, Naji Marshall, another physical defender. So it'll be interesting to see how the Pelicans match up. But a lot of times in games like this, if you're the Pelicans, what happens, and I'm sure same for the Clippers, when you're a good team, you force the opponent to do what you want to do. And that's what I didn't like about what the Pelicans did against Houston. Houston forced the Pelicans into a tempo that the Pelicans didn't want to do. And they got to win. And that just kind of grated at me because it was like, Houston's not the superior team. You got to be able to impose your will on that team. So who's going to be able to impose their will in this game is going to be serious because, the Clippers like to get up and down too. The Clippers love to shoot threes. They're at 38.5% on three as a team, which is ridiculous. Ridiculous. 38.5% as a team, third best in the league. So I want to see if the Pelicans can, one, chase them off the line because the Pelicans are one of the best three-point defending teams in the league, fourth best. And I also want to see who can kind of force the other team to do what it wants the other team to do. Otherwise, now, if neither team can force the other to do what they want them to, it's going to be a shootout. It's going to be 140 to 137, which will be entertaining, but, ain't so necessarily so great for the heart. But I want to see which team can force the other one to do what it wants them to do.
Yeah, with a pretty big 5-game road trip coming over 10 days. And also one of the questions that was asked to Zion at the end of the game on Wednesday was his thoughts on how Willie Green matched up with Chris Finch. Look, Ty Lue's a really good head coach.
Yes, he is.
And so, again, this is one of those snapshots, too. It is January, but I think it's going to have a playoff feel. They know in the locker room, the Pels, and I think the Clippers, too. These two teams could face off at one point in the postseason. They're competing for the Western Conference here. So I think the fans are going to feel it. I think the play on the court's going to dictate it. I'd be shocked if you see one of these two teams not show up tonight. I think you're going to see a really hotly contested game. I'm curious. It's going to be fun.
It's a great measuring stick game.
Yeah.
That's a good team. This is a good team. Who's going to be the best team tonight? Ric Flair used to always say, if you want to beat a man, you got to beat the man.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's, the Clippers are one of the men in the Western Conference. That's a team that, when healthy, should and probably will contend for a championship. Mm-hmm. If you're the Pelicans and you want to get to that level, you got to be able to beat teams like that. And after that, you got to be able to climb down off that cloud and go on the road for 5 games and be representative because, you look at the beginning of the season, you say, man, that 5-game road sweep right there is, that's going to be difficult. Mm-hmm. But now the Pelicans have shown they can play anybody just about anywhere. So now you don't feel so gloomy about it because now it's all of a sudden, you know what? You think about it ahead of time, you say, boy, that might be a must win against the Clippers before you go on the road for 5.
Yeah.
Well, now I ain't necessarily saying the Pelicans don't want to win it, but you don't feel as bad because you feel like they can go on the road and win them. But look, you want to take care of home at every opportunity that you can, and you especially want to do it against the better teams because you want those teams having it in their head, if I got to go back there for the playoffs, it ain't going to be easy.
Final thing for you, because I brought this up on the show, and the graph was, he happened to want some lunch. So I treated him to some lunch on Thursday when he showed up. But I asked him this as well, and Ali Kosel. Give me your top 5 to 7, just off the top of your head, NBA players right now currently.
Well, I'm going to stay with Giannis in the top 7. I got to go with Jason Tatum in there. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go with, I can't forget Joker. God, I feel embarrassed almost forgetting Joker. I still got to put LeBron in there. I think he's still one of those guys. I also have to go with a healthy Jimmy Butler. I like a healthy Jimmy Butler in that list because Jimmy Butler is a guy who kind of wills them to wins. Mm-hmm. And somehow or another, he just does it. And let's think here. Who else we got here? De'Aaron Fox, when he's going, I don't know if I'd put him top 7, but I certainly have him top 10. I like him a lot.
Okay.
Oh, God, my goodness. You should have slapped me. Luka. Good grief. Luka. Mm-hmm. Luka's got to be in there. And I guess I'm having a hard time going past Luka. But I think that's about 6 or 7 right there. Right. But I feel pretty good about that 6 or 7.
So here's the point of my exercise. The reason I said that, because it's interesting. You brought up 2 that didn't make the list for Ollie in the graph. Todd put up Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. OKC's the second team right now, right? He put them in there as well. You mentioned Luka and De'Aaron Fox, which is coming up on Sunday. Giannis and all that. Basically, it's the month of January. Is the point that I'm bringing up. Mm-hmm. The Pelicans are going to be playing either the top 5 or top 7 best player in the NBA along with his teams. When you think about it, right? The Kings on Sunday, you said De'Aaron Fox. Notice you didn't even say Steph Curry.
Yeah.
Right? That's coming on Wednesday. The Joker on Friday, Luka twice, Saturday and Monday. You got the Hornets. We didn't even talk about Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal. And, of course, the guy that loves – and Booker, who can cook it there as well. You got the Jazz again at home, but then you got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at home on a back-to-back. The next night is Giannis, and, by the way, Dame Lillard is on that team as well. And then you go on the road to Boston, and it's Brown and Tatum, and then the Rockets. The reason I bring that up is it's 15 games in the month of January. I would love to just be above 500. Now, it's not even, so you're going to have one more win than loss regardless. Mm-hmm. But I think if you can just, and I don't mean this in a bad way, can you just get through January healthy, more wins than losses? JD, I do think at that point, you can maybe say this team could be a contender if you're 9-10 wins. That's what Todd said. I'm like, I'd be happy 8-7. I know I want better than that. Yeah. But if I do see 9-10 wins, JD, I could be feeling that. But I think at the bare minimum, if I'm 8-7 in the month of January, I could probably start feeling comfortable that a top 6 spot for sure. And I think I'm within reach of number 4. And that's what Larry Nance said to me on Media Day. His goal, this team's goal, was to host a first-round playoff match, or series. And that's all I'm saying. This month, you're going to face the best. And it's the hardest schedule in the NBA. Yeah. It is this month. And
I would feel good with 8-7 too. I mean, because 8-7 going through that kind of a month, it's a grind month, basically. Mm-hmm. It's a grind month. You're talking about 15 games, and you're talking about elite level competition, which you have in the NBA every night anyway.
Sure.
But there are no breathers. And when you're talking about the best players, and I feel so embarrassed to forget Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, because he is probably right now, for my money, probably the best closer in the NBA. And so, now you're talking about teams that play well down the stretch. All these teams have elite scorers. All these elite scorers get calls, which Zion doesn't get. And so to be able to get 8-7 out of that, it's going to be a fist fight through the entire month. And so you hope that the Pelicans are up for it and I think they are. I think they understand. Right. People are looking at them a little bit different right now. People aren't looking at the Pelicans like, one, you can't look at them the same way because they're not injured. So now you can't look at them and say, okay, we can chalk one up. Now you got to say, okay, they're formidable. And not only are they formidable because all 3 guys are out there, all 3 guys are playing well.
Yeah.
And so now you get your bench back because Larry Nance coming back.
He was huge.
Oh, Larry Nance coming back was so big for the bench because you can steal a lot of minutes for Valanciunas with Larry Nance on the floor. And in fact, Larry Nance will be on the floor closing out games because he is such a heady player. He does all the right things. Mm-hmm. He gets the rebounds. He blocks the shots. He makes the rotations on defense to take the offensive fouls. He does all those little things that a big guy generally doesn't do. And so he can finish out games. And then you get Alvarado in the stretch that he's in. So I think the Pelicans feel good, and I think people are looking at the Pelicans. They're looking at the Pelicans on the schedule now saying, you know what, that's going to be a hard game. That's going to be a difficult team to beat. We just can't walk in and just roll it out there and get those guys because everybody's healthy and they're playing well. So I take 8-7. I really would. I'm like Graf. I'm hoping 9-6, but I take 8-7 because I think that it show a great deal of progress because, in former years, I hate to refer to former years.
But it is. We're showing the steps.
Yeah, former years you might be, 3-12 or 5-10 out of that.
That's a big difference.
And that's a huge difference to be 8-7, 9-6.
Because now you're battling is the point that I'm trying to make. Now all of a sudden the trade deadline is a little different. You look at it. And now you're trying to move up because people look at the NBA All-Star Weekend as the halfway point. It's not. The halfway point's in the month of January.
Yes.
So you don't want to be having to fight up. And look, I keep saying this with Jim all the time. The better they can play here and you can tread this month, the further and further you're getting away from 10.
Yes.
And the only reason I'm saying that is because in the past couple of seasons, JD, for whatever reason, it's injuries or whatever, this team's battling just to get to 10, man, to 9, to 7. I am going to enjoy, and I would love a spring of trying to get to 4 or 5, and you're 6. That I don't want to be anywhere near the play. I don't want to be talking about it. You know what I'm saying? I kept using the analogy to Tulane football. Remember when Willie Fritz first got here, it was 6 wins. Then he got to 6 wins again. And now the last 2 seasons, I have Corey Glore on or somebody from Tulane on, and oh, that's right. That was win number 6. You're bowl eligible in October. Like, you don't even think about it.
Yeah.
That's where I think this organization needs to get. The NBA, more than any other sport, and you know this, you have to take steps.
Yeah.
And there's steps. So, but get to that point, keep moving. But I want to bring perspective for Pels fans. Oh, they've lost 3 or 4. Hey, it's a tough month.
Yeah.
Get one more win than one loss in this month, and I think you're in a good spot to get 6 or above.
And I understand fans are emotional, and I get it. You know, you lose 2 in a row, and everybody ought to be traded, and every coach ought to be fired, and you know the owner ought to sell the team.
There are a lot
and all
of
these
GMs
things.
in the city.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Woo. You know, there are days where I kind of stay off Twitter because it's like, you know what, this is pretty absurd, and I probably shouldn't be watching this. But you got to understand that this team, and again, you got to understand also that these big 3 haven't played together a lot.
Yeah.
They look like they're figuring it out pretty well, but they don't have a great deal of experience together, and they're learning together. And it's fun watching it come together as a plan. And so, 8-7 over this kind of month, I take it, I'd run to the bank with it, I'd deposit it because everybody else is playing tough schedules in January too. So if you're one of the teams that's above 500, that's going to be to your benefit. And then, as you mentioned, you'll be talking about, playing for the 4 seed as opposed to playing for, 10 to get into the play-in and that kind of thing. I don't want to be dealing with the play-in this year. I don't want to have to fool around with that.
100%. That's what I'm saying. All right, I've taken way too much of your time. Let's go have some fun. It's the Pelicans and the Clippers tonight. And then when we come back on the Pelicans podcast on Monday, we'll be talking about 2 games. Not just the Clippers, but game 1 of a 5-game road trip against the Sacramento Kings. As always, appreciate your time.
Anytime.
Yep, for sure. You've been listening to the Pelicans podcast. As always, make sure you like and follow the show, and then boom, it'll pop up on your computer and your phone when the new one drops and is saved, and you can go and check it out. So appreciate you, and we'll see you next week on the New Orleans Pelicans podcast. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans podcast. Join us 3 times per week on Pelicans.com, the Pelicans mobile app, the iHeartRadio app, or where you get your podcasts. And be sure to give Jim and Gus a follow on X at Jim_Eichenhofer and GCat_17. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Pelicans podcast.